Welcome to the 32nd edition of my MCU ranking. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. So today we've got a big one as I'm ranking all 32 MCU movies from my least favorite to my favorite with the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And I want to let you guys know there have been some pretty big movements since the last time I did this in February. I've rewatched a few movies, and there's been some shifts, just a heads up. But be sure to hit the like button, comment your MCU ranking down below, and let me know where Guardians 3 lands for you. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell as I have tons of MCU videos coming the rest of this week, and it would mean a lot as I'm trying to hit my goal of 75,000 subscribers here on the channel. But without further ado, let's dive right into my MCU ranking, and again, I'm gonna zoom through some of these lower ones because I don't really have much else to say. At number 32, in dead last, is Thor: Love and Thunder, by far the worst MCU movie. I rewatched the opening 10 to 15 minutes with the Guardians just so I could get a little refresher for that before Guardians 3. Other than that, this movie can be thrown away for all I care. At number 31 is Thor: The Dark World, a snooze fest of an MCU movie that's only redeeming qualities is the Loki-Thor brotherhood relationship. That's the only strong point. Everything else, I'm going to sleep if it's on. At number 30 for me is Captain Marvel, which I will be rewatching before the Marvels in November, so possibly it can make a little bit of a jump up in this ranking. This movie's always been pretty bland to me with not the most likable characters. Nick Fury and Goose have always stolen the show. But number 29 for me is The Incredible Hulk. A lot of people recently in my MCU Hot Takes video said The Incredible Hulk's underrated. I disagree. It feels so disconnected from the MCU with Edward Norton playing Hulk, and I've just never really enjoyed this one. Anytime I try to rewatch it, it feels like a chore. At number 28 on my list is Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, perhaps one of the bigger letdowns in the post-Endgame era. The hype was monumental, the trailers and marketing fully sold me, and I went into the movie and just walked out so defeated because it felt like a Doctor Strange movie clashing with a Wanda movie. They should have both just gotten their own solo projects. They threw everything away that they set up in the middle act with the Illuminati, which was one of the coolest premises I've seen in an MCU movie, and they just washed it all down the drain with a snap of Wanda's fingers pretty much. I will admit though, it's a very well shot movie with Sam Raimi behind the camera. Lots of visual flair, but not much to the story here. At number 27 is Eternals, a movie with some of the coolest characters introduced in Phase 4. I love Druagon, Makari, Phastos, Icarus, Kingo the movie star. It's filled with awesome characters that I hope we get more of soon, but the fatal flaw of this movie is that it's like 2.5 hours long, and it's introducing these concepts that are trying to shift our entire perception of the MCU, and it just became too much to handle in one singular movie. I appreciate the ambition, but it just didn't really land for me. It's one of the least rewatchable MCU movies in recent years. But coming in at number 26 for me is Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is the clear weak link from the Ant-Man trilogy. It's still funny, and I like how it's lighthearted and especially served as a break between Infinity War and Endgame in the summer of 2018, but it's not very rewatchable when compared to the other Ant-Man films. It's got a pretty weak villain in Ghost, and all around, it feels like such a low-stakes movie that it's hard to really care about anything that's going on. At number 25, and possibly the first hot take of this video, I've got Iron Man 3. I know a lot of people love this one. It's never been my cup of tea. Now, Tony Stark is my favorite MCU character, but this is my least rewatched movie of his. It's got one of the more forgettable MCU villains with Aldrich Killian, and I just never liked how Tony was separated from his suit the whole movie. I know a lot of people like that, and I know what it's going for, but it never did it for me. I still can't stand that whole twist with Trevor being the Mandarin. I do appreciate what they did with it in Shang-Chi, which we're going to talk about here later, though. It's just a movie that fell to the wayside for me and is so lackluster compared to the other two Iron Man films. But coming in at number 24 for me is the first Thor movie. It's wild to say that Thor is the second best of the 4 Thor movies. I never thought we would live in a world where that would be the case, but it's the world we live in. The first Thor movie is epic in scale. I still love the whole opening battle with the Frost Giants, and it introduces us to Loki, the first big bad villain of Phase 1 of the MCU. It's got a strong brotherhood story between Thor and Loki. It creates this immersive world of Asgard, and it's not that bad of a movie. It's not as strong as other Phase 1 movies, but it's still enjoyable and holds up. I would watch it today and enjoy it more than Thor: The Dark World and Thor: Love and Thunder. But coming in number 23 for me is Iron Man 2. Now, I know a lot of people have this in their bottom 5. I've always had a big soft spot for it. It's actually the first MCU movie I was ever able to see in theaters, so I'll always cherish that. But I remember watching the trailer for this movie on a loop leading up to the day that I went and saw it in theaters. It has one of the coolest suit-up scenes we've ever seen from Iron Man when he stomps on the case. That is so cool. Whiplash is a run-of-the-mill generic villain, but we also get a recast of Rhodey here, and Rhodey actually gets the War Machine suit. The romance between Pepper and Tony is further explored. It's got a really great AC/DC-filled soundtrack. And how could I not mention the introduction of Black Widow herself is in this movie. There's lots to love here. Admittedly, it's trying to set up way too much too fast and sort of loses focus, but it's more watchable to me than Iron Man 3, and I have fonder memories of this film than Iron Man 3, which is why I have to put it a little bit higher, because hey, this is my personal ranking. Coming in number 22 for me is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, a movie that did its best at continuing the legacy of Chadwick Boseman. Shuri takes on the mantle of Black Panther here, and I appreciate a lot of things this movie does. It gives us Namor, who's one of the stronger villains in the post-Endgame era. Riri Williams, who as Ironheart was introduced. I can't wait for her show because she was one of the highlights for me personally in this movie. But on a rewatch, this movie is way too long and it's not well paced. There's significant pockets of this movie that are just bogged down. I still admire it and I love the way that it comes full circle in the third act. Plus it tackles grief arguably better than any of the projects in the MCU and has those emotionally heavy moments. But it's not one of those MCU movies that I'm just clamoring to rewatch, though I do appreciate that they're keeping this legacy going after Chadwick Boseman. But number 21 for me is the original Black Panther, which I still think is better than Wakanda Forever. Chadwick Boseman just commands the screen in this role. You really can root for him as the lead character of this film. That's also something I felt was a little lacking in Wakanda Forever, was a clear lead to root for. I think Killmonger is a slightly overrated villain, but he's still great. Michael B. Jordan is a damn great actor. And without question, my favorite aspect of the first Black Panther is how immersive it was in exploring this world of Wakanda. It really took the audience into this new world within the MCU that we hadn't explored. The costume design is brilliant. The score is so great by Ludwig Göransson. And from a technical perspective, this movie is just gorgeous. We got a lot of this Wakandan lore, and coming off the heels of Civil War, it was awesome to see Black Panther headline his own movie. But coming in at number 20 for me is one of my more common hot takes, Black Widow. This is, again, a bottom tier MCU movie for a lot of people. I myself view it as a feel-good movie, especially because of the introduction of Florence Pugh's Yelena and David Harbour's Red Guardian. That father-daughter relationship just hits right in the feels. Plus, Natasha and Yelena's relationship itself is the anchor of this movie. Looking at the big picture, this is a family story first and foremost with some really solid action. Now, I will admit it's got its flaws. I am aware of that. There's some wonky CGI for sure, but this was in post-production during the whole pandemic, so I'm not too mad about that. The real issue with this movie is that it has some of the worst villains in the MCU with Dreykov and the Taskmaster reveal. I thought they butchered the character of Taskmaster, but I can overlook that because of the way this movie makes me feel, which is happy inside. It's a feel-good, comforting movie in a way, so I appreciate it for what it is. But coming in at number 19 for me is going to be Doctor Strange, the first Doctor Strange film that serves as a very solid origin for this character. I always mention this when I talk about Doctor Strange, but the fourth episode of What If really enhances my viewing of this film. In fact, it makes me look at it through a whole new lens. If you guys haven't watched that episode of What If, I highly recommend it, and then go right into Doctor Strange, and you might be able to view it with a new appreciation, even though it is this What If story. But all that's to say, this movie was praised for its visuals, and rightfully so. It is still one of the most visually gorgeous MCU films. Trippy as hell when he first goes astral. I mean, in the theater, I remember just being shook. But Doctor Strange is solid. It was never like a top-tier MCU movie to me, just because it does feel a little generic at times, but again, it has its enjoyable moments for sure. But coming in at number 18 for me is going to be Captain America: The First Avenger, another solid origin story, and I always appreciate how it took place in the past during the World War II era. Because of that, we got the Nazis as the main villains, and Red Skull might just be one of the most run-of-the-mill villains we've ever seen in the MCU, but he's still a menace, and Hugo Weaving is able to play him so well with these villainous, dastardly lines that he delivers. The exploration of Cap and Bucky's relationship, as well as Cap and Peggy's romantic relationship, are the clear strong points for me, and of course the end of this movie, the final line, always hurts me. At number 17 on my list is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. A lot of people have bashed this movie, calling it the absolute worst MCU movie, which I just fully disagree with. It was a little bit higher on my last ranking because I had just seen the movie, so I was coming down from that high, but after sitting on it for a few months, it's fallen a few spots. Now look, I acknowledge this movie is not perfect, but I had an absolute blast with it. It felt like a bit of a return to form to the earlier phases of the MCU, exploring the quantum realm and just giving us a fun adventure from beginning to end. I love the character Scott Lang. He's probably one of my favorite currently alive MCU lead characters, and Paul Rudd just has so much fun in this role. I thought the movie had its fair share of comedic bits that worked. Kang the Conqueror was a menace as a villain, and I'm curious to see how they handle the future of his character as we head into Kang Dynasty. Drama outside of the MCU aside, I'm curious to see how this character is going to come face to face with everyone, notably the Avengers. The movie was goofy and super cheesy at times, but to me, it was very self-aware of that, so I never held that over its head as a critique. There were some lines that didn't work and jokes that definitely missed the mark. Catherine Newton's performance as Cassie Lang was distractingly bad at times, but all around, I was able to overlook that and enjoy this family story within the quantum realm. It was really cute seeing Scott and Cassie rekindle their relationship, so I enjoyed Quantumania for what it was and didn't hate it like most people. At number 16 on my list is Avengers: Age of Ultron. Many people call this the most underrated MCU movie. It's definitely in contention for that because because a lot of people say it's terrible and has one of the worst MCU villains. I strongly disagree. I've always appreciated the action in this movie, like the opening one-take shot when all the Avengers come in frame together. It's still one of the coolest shots in the MCU. This is also the last movie in the MCU where we see all 6 original Avengers fighting side by side, which is bittersweet looking back on it. So Age of Ultron is definitely underrated, but so many people have called it underrated it's almost become a bit overrated, where some people will try and throw around that it's better than the first Avengers or even Endgame, which I strongly disagree with. We're about halfway through my ranking, so be sure to hit that like button. Again, comment down below your ranking and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Without further ado, coming in at number 15 for me is Spider-Man Far From Home. Another one of those wildly overhated MCU movies. People call this the outright worst Spider-Man movie, which baffles me. Honestly, it was really neat to see Peter Parker outside of New York on this vacation over the summer, and Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio is the real highlight of this movie. He's having so much fun in this role, going over the top. We get that whole exposition dump scene where he's just being this maniacal villain, purely out of a comic book, it feels like. And the drone action in the third act is so cool. Like that scene where Peter just fully embraces his Peter Tingle or spider sense and destroys all the drones and takes out Mysterio. That's awesome. Plus the cliffhanger ending and the way that it plays right into No Way Home is perfect, making it feel like one of the more connected trilogies in the MCU. Never understood the hate from Far From Home. It's a very good movie in my mind. Number 14 on my list is Thor Ragnarok, a movie that slowly slips in my MCU ranking, I feel like, every time I post this video, just because the humor doesn't age well for me. Like, the jokes hit the first time and maybe the second, but with each new viewing of this movie, the humor doesn't hit the same. I really appreciate that they gave Thor the short hair in this movie, fully changed up his look and his personality. I'm down for that. It was for the better, as we saw, you know, in Infinity War and Endgame, and we got the whole Gladiator Hulk scene, which is awesome. The soundtrack rules with Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin playing when Thor comes down on the bridge at the end. That's still one of the dopest moments in the MCU. And Hela's a great MCU villain, so this movie's action-packed, it's got its humor, but something about it, the initial pizzazz and like pop of Ragnarok has definitely faded a little bit for me. At one point, I was comfortable putting it in the top 10, but now it's fallen back ever so slightly. At number 13 on my list is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, a movie that took me by surprise. I ended up seeing this 3 times in theaters. It was such a joyful time exploring this fantasy world of the MCU with Ta Lo in the third act, but also really getting to know this new character in Shang-Chi, who is just a cool kick-ass dude. That opening fight scene on the bus is still so awesome to go rewatch. And Wen Wu is a slept-on MCU villain. Like, he's top 10 for sure, and the whole father-son dynamic there just hits. I do think that the third act goes a little off the rails, just ever so slightly, but Shang-Chi is still a blast of an MCU movie, and I'm excited to see when this character will pop up again in the MCU. I know it's getting a sequel, but I would love to see that sooner rather than later. At number 12 on my list is Ant-Man, the first movie that kickstarted Scott Lang's journey in the MCU. One of the funniest MCU movies without question, especially Luis, played by Michael Pena, with his little quips and recaps. We need one of those again very soon. This was another one of those movies that was a big risk for Marvel at the time, but it paid off. You got some great heist sequences here, and Yellow Jacket is another one of those solid, sort of slept-on MCU villains. Ant-Man is just such a blast. Now, coming in at number 11 on my list is a movie that's fallen from grace a little bit in my eyes. I've always called it one of the more overrated MCU movies. That is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I'll stand by this. It's a great movie, but it's the most overrated in the MCU. Overrated does not equal bad. We got introduced to Sam Wilson, who is now our current Captain America, and he's the man. We got some really cool stylized action, notably the highway fight scene, and the Bucky-Cap relationship is really the heart and soul of this movie. Plus, huge revelations are made, notably with Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. It's the first time the MCU really went the thriller route, and it paid off. I hope they revisit this tone again soon, and it looks like they're going to in Secret Invasion. Now, is it the best comic book film of all time? Hell no. Is it the best MCU movie? Nope. That's why I say it's overrated, but it's still a very good movie. But now we're getting into my top 10. It's about to get real. Coming in at number 10 for me is a movie that has made its way back from the ashes in my mind, and I owe it the biggest apology ever. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. If you know me, I've talked about this movie before, and it's been very low on this ranking before, so here's my backstory with it. I saw the movie in theaters opening day, and I really enjoyed it. I even told my friend it might be top 10 MCU for me. Then I watched it like once or twice, especially before Infinity War, and then since then, I hadn't watched it until last week. So for whatever reason, I started seeing a bunch of negative reviews about this movie online, and I was like, oh, maybe I don't like Guardians 2, and I somehow tricked myself into thinking I didn't like this movie, when in reality, I'd always really enjoyed it. So I rewatched it, and I had an eye-opening experience with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It captures the humor, heart, and action of the first film, gives us a better villain and ego, and has damn near a better soundtrack as well. I stand by the fact that it is still a little bit all over the place in the opening act, but the movie finds its footing fairly quickly and ends up giving us a riveting third act. It's quotable, it packs an emotional punch, and Yondu's death is so heartbreaking. I have no clue why I bought into all the negativity surrounding this movie. That just happens with certain movies, and again, I apologize Guardians 2, you just made my top 10, and we're going to talk about the Guardians again very, very soon. Coming in at number 9 for me is Spider-Man Homecoming. You guys have heard me sing my praises for this movie before. I love the coming of age feel, and Vulture is so damn good. The moment from this movie is when Peter goes to pick up Liz for Homecoming, and Vulture answers the door and he says, "You must be Peter." That then leads into the whole car ride scene where Vulture discovers that Peter is Spider-Man. Chef's kiss. That is what I love about Spider-Man. Damn good movie. Number 8 on my list is the first epic team-up movie we ever saw in theaters, The Avengers. As time passes, more and more people start to turn on this movie and say it doesn't age well or doesn't hold up. I strongly disagree. It's still one of the most fast-paced, action-packed MCU movies to date. The Battle of New York is so iconic, and this might be the most quotable MCU movie of the bunch. I'll never get sick of watching this movie. I could throw it on any day and be entertained. This movie opened the door for all the team-up movies that would follow. Number 7 on my list, Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, when I initially saw this, it was almost my favorite MCU movie because, again, I was reeling off these emotions and the high that I felt when we saw all three Spider-Men swinging on screen together. But as we've gotten further removed from the first time I've watched this movie, I start to see a little bit more flaws. I've seen the movie like 7 or 8 times, and from the moment Tobey and Andrew show up onward, it's perfection, and I still think it's damn great before that, but the first hour is a lot of slow-moving build-up, and it's not until Tobey and Andrew show up that the movie really kicks it into the next gear. I will always cherish this movie. There's tons of nostalgia associated with it, and I think it's a damn good movie, but there's just movies above it now that I think are pure, better made movies. No Way Home is still top 10, and I don't see it ever moving out of that. At number 6 on my list is Guardians of the Galaxy. I think this might be the most watched MCU movie by people who aren't fans of the MCU. Anyone could watch this movie and enjoy it with no knowledge of other MCU projects. It gave us this space adventure with a new group of lovable characters who became a family over the course of the movie. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you tear up. It's a perfect James Gunn movie. It was without a doubt the biggest risk the MCU took, and it paid off and then some. We now have 3 Guardians movies, and these characters are beloved across the globe. Now we're getting into my top 5. Things are heating up. So hit that like button again, comment down below your favorite MCU movie. At number 5 on my list, Captain America Civil War. I can never really see this one leaving the top 5. Maybe one day it will, but I've said this a million times and I truly mean it. It portrays conflict better than any movie in the MCU. The way that I'm constantly flip-flopping emotions and sides on my team Cap and my team Iron Man, I'm constantly going back and forth because of how well the movie's written. This was a game changer for the MCU in terms of superhero action. The whole airport battle was insane the first time we saw it. The final fight was wild between Cap and Bucky and Tony. Got introduced to the MCU's Spider-Man, got introduced to the MCU's Black Panther. The movie is slam-packed from beginning to end. This is one of the most pivotal MCU movies, and it's a true anchor to this entire Infinity Saga. Coming in at number 4 is the movie you've been waiting for me to talk about, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, a lot of you might think this is just recency bias, but I promise you this, it's the best Guardians movie, and the way this movie made me feel is unparalleled to a lot on this list. It brought me to tears multiple times. I'm talking, I was wiping tears off my face. It was action-packed, including one of the dopest shot action scenes I've ever seen in an MCU film. It was hilarious, might even be the funniest Guardians film, and it was just a beautiful send-off to all of these characters. They're characters that we've grown to know and love since the first film back in 2014, and we've seen them pop up in their own movies and other characters' movies, but this is their final movie in the MCU, and they damn sure face the music. It might just have the best soundtrack. I feel like each movie almost outdoes itself with a soundtrack, and this one might just be my favorite. I'm gonna watch it again before I make that definitive decision, but we got such a rich backstory on Rocket. The High Evolutionary is a despicable villain who you just want to punch in the face every time he says a new line, and I feel like everyone has closure here. It moved me on so many different levels. It's just a beautiful movie, and there was just a moment where I was smiling, overcome with joy. This movie is special. It deserved to be very high on this MCU list, and I'm curious to see how it holds up over time. Coming in at number 3 for me is Iron Man. I've always had it in my top 5, but I realized it's my 3rd favorite. For some reason, I was like not putting it there, but I needed to quit lying to myself. It's my favorite standalone MCU movie. Tony Stark is the man. He's my favorite character, and I say this every time I make a new MCU ranking, so I'm gonna say it again. For those who have been around for a long time, let me know how many times I've said this. In 4th grade, I had the DVD. I would come home from school every day and watch this movie on a loop for about a week or 2 straight. I adore it. I never got sick of it. It kickstarted this whole wonderful MCU franchise that we still love and talk about to this day, and it is the best origin story in the MCU. In fact, one of the best origin story superhero movies out there. And I'm gonna talk about my 1 and 2 together because they're the 1-2 punch. Number 2, Avengers Endgame. Number 1, Avengers Infinity War. Endgame is a perfect 3-act structure that has the best final battle I may have ever seen. I rewatched it last week and I cried harder. Like almost every time I rewatch this movie, I cry harder. Maybe it's because I realize we're getting older and further removed from this movie and this era of the MCU, but also I just feel like I relate to it more as I get older. Like Tony passing away is so devastating, and the funeral that just follows, it breaks my my heart. Cap has a perfect ending, Tony has a perfect ending, I could gush about it for hours, but Infinity War, my number one, set up everything that we saw in Endgame, and it could stand alone as its own elite MCU movie where the villain wins. A very rare case, but the villain wins. It's a great cliffhanger, it's action-packed from the start, so fast-paced, and it still impresses me how the Russos are able to handle all these different character groupings all around the galaxy. Not a second is wasted in this movie. Thanos is fleshed out so well here as the villain, and from the start, he is cemented as the big baddie, killing off Loki in a shocking moment. Arguably the most quotable MCU movie, and it has some of the best battles in the MCU. It also might be the most shocked of everybody in the theater when half of humanity and half the Avengers are just wiped away. I don't see these movies ever being topped. Endgame 2, Infinity War number 1, I don't think that's ever going anywhere, but I dream of the day where the MCU tops these movies, because that will be the day. But that does it for my ranking of all 32 MCU movies, including Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, so be sure to hit that like button. Comment down below your ranking of these movies, especially where Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 places. I'm curious to see what the consensus on that movie is. Subscribe and hit that notification bell, as I got tons of MCU videos coming this week about the Guardians and just the movies. I'm also very close to 75,000 subscribers, and it would mean a lot if you guys could help me get there. Hope you all have a great rest of your week, and stay tuned for more videos coming very soon, but until next time, I'll see you guys later.